out of speaking as little as possible because I see here some familiar faces that are clearly able to do so better than myself. I would like to start with Abraham Idan because he is the person in charge of the Agassi estate, and he may have a message to all of you regarding the treasures that are found there. So Abraham, would you like to say a few words?
I was a student of Agassi. I wrote a PhD in 1980s with Professor Ben-Ami Sharpshen and Agassi were the advisors. We wrote 2 books together, so these are the 2 books. I don't know if you can see them. One is Beg to Differ, and the other one, Philosophy from a Skeptical Perspective. Both were published in one in Cambridge University Press, another in Springer. And I was a very close friend together with Nimrod, but for many years I used to visit him every few weeks and to discuss the philosophy and other things for many years. And if you have any question, if you wrote something, if you did something with Agassi, and then you need my approval for republishing or something like this, please contact me and I'll do it. My email address is abraham@wizsoft.com.
Also, if anyone has the idea of doing some research on Agassi's archive, I believe it's possible, right?
Yes.
Agassi has outstanding correspondences with virtually anyone that was important and alive at that time. Some of the correspondences, I'm afraid I could not find. I discussed with him, for example, an extensive correspondence with Merton, but he has a wonderful correspondence throughout the years with Feyerabend and Lakatosh and every one of Popper's many students, and of course with Popper himself. And these are available for research, and they are wonderful stuff to look at. And I see here also Yoela. Yoela, you wanted to say a few words?
Yes, please, if I may.
Sure.
Remembering Joseph Agassi. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this important event. I do not intend to talk about philosophy nor science. Just few personal remarks and thoughts about Joseph we loved and admired. Admiring Joseph was easy, almost self-evident, but in too many cases, it was married to resentment, if not animosity. He was just too much, overwhelming. His cosmic knowledge, paired with deep wisdom, turned the limitless facts from all branches of science into encompassing, breathing, logical, and bewitching entity. That was enough to irritate any intelligent or even brilliant scholar of philosophy. But on top of that, Joseph expected every colleague or student to be on par with him. This was downright infuriating. Instead of making his interlocutor proud of being treated as his peer, it made too many of them feel he belittled them. The fact that it was not his intent, that it did not enter his mind at all, made no difference. Actually, it was one of Joske's rare blind spots. He could not comprehend that his very availability, his total generosity, the ease with which he put his treasure for use to anyone and everyone, that this most noble trait, this was what estranged and distanced so many people from him. Only those of his peers, students and friends, who were not interested in making comparisons, those who were truly interested in broadening their horizons, in deepening and enriching their mental world, those enjoyed the privilege of having Joske as a mentor, a colleague, and a friend. I cannot remember Joske without remembering Judith Agassi. Judith was his forte, his best friend, his better half, the strong constant of his very existence. He defined and facilitated his relations with real life. Judith was his love. No denying it. Joske had a roving eye for the fair sex. But there never was any doubt about his total love and devotion to Judith. Being in close friendship with both of them for over 50 years, it is my belief that Joske's most burning passion was the application of philosophy, or to be more exact, of metaphysics, to daily life. Joske was ardently interested in Israeli politics, and he was deeply hurt by the vicious turn Israel has chosen to its own detriment. Judaism, as Joske loved and understood, and the Messianic Judaism that is taking Israel into captivity have nothing in common. The country he fought for its independence as a parachute officer, barely out of high school, turned its back on every principle and every value Joske believed in. Joske's last few years were marked by two contrasting features. He mellowed in personal relations, and he enjoyed a remarkable and popular following and great esteem to which he was not accustomed. On the other hand, he suffered acutely by the loss of Judith and the disappearance of the vision he had of Israel. Finally, I cannot shut up about my overriding feeling since Yosuke left us. To tell the truth, I am mad at Yosuke. I am really mad at Yosuke. How dare he live like that when the country, all of us, his friends and his students and followers are in such dire need of his guidance and wisdom. Thank you.
Yoela, way to go.
Thank you, Yoela. Maybe can you say a few words about the circumstances of meeting Yosuke and getting to know him? How did you meet him?
I tried to remember, but Yosuke is such an integral part of my life that I just can't remember the time that he wasn't in there. I think an Israeli poet, her name was Batsheva Sherif, introduced us.
When was that?
Over 50 years ago. And since then, it was Yosuke. You know how he was. Charlie certainly knows how it was. And Nimrod and everybody else around.
Charlie, would you like to say a few words?
Oh, my gracious. Well, I could tell how I met Yosuke. It's a rattling good story, actually. I was a graduate student at Yale University in the History of Science and Medicine department. Are you hearing me all right? I know my voice.
Yes.
Okay. And Derek Price put a book in my hand telling me it was the antidote to my enthusiasm for Thomas Kuhn. And that, there we go. That book was Towards the Historiography of Science by Joseph Agassi. Along the way, I attended the seminars of Norwood Russell Hansen, and we became friends, quite unexpected. Hansen has a place in the long arc of the development of our discipline, history of science and philosophy of science. I made an application for my PhD qualifiers, having taken all my coursework and achieved the necessary grades. And the answer was a letter dismissing me from Yale University, canceling my fellowship, informing me that I would not be allowed to register for courses in the fall. So I picked up the phone immediately and called Russ Hansen. And he said, meet me at the college at 1 o'clock, which I did. And I read the letter out to him. And he was mightily angry. He said, they have to realize that graduate students are not medieval serfs. And his first suggestion was, come to my department and I'll see that you're admitted and you can be my PhD student. And I said, I don't have an undergraduate foundation. I would have to spend 2 years studying undergraduate philosophy and then take my qualifying exams and then move on. So thank you, but no. And he said, would you like to study with Tom Kuhn? I can arrange it. I said, well, that's more Ivy League, and I think I've had enough Ivy League for a while. But do you know a man named Joseph Agassi? He said, know him. I got him his job at BU. And that was the first of 3 stories that I heard how I got Joe Agassi his job at VU, all of which had a foundation in truth. I mean, these were not fantasies. So he said, I'll call him and arrange for you to meet him. And so later I got a call. Agassi will see you. Be on the corner in Park Square in Boston at noon on Thursday, or whatever day it was. So I presented myself there. It was a blistering hot day. I had no idea how I would recognize Agassi or how Agassi would recognize me. And then this beat up jalopy roared up to the curb. The driver leaned across the seat and threw the door open and shouted, "Agassi, get in!" So I got in the car and I started with the usual formalities, and he said, "Wait." And he turned the corner and drove the car up half on the sidewalk. Reached in the back seat and pulled up a shopping bag, Jordan Marsh shopping bag. And he said, "I won't be long. If a cop comes, drive around the block," and vanished. And he was true to his word. He came back in about 10 minutes and nobody bothered me. And then he got in the car and pulled off the sidewalk. And he said, "Now." And that was the starting gun for a conversation that only ended when he ended. And he became an integral part of my life. My first thought when I heard that he had died, and by the way, 4 days before he died, I was Zooming with him, or the other, whatever it was, the video. I asked him, "Do you have any plans to leave home there?" And this is, I remember the last thing he said to me: "As long as I am here, I am here." And I thought, how marvelous a tautology. But my first thought was that Yaska had been such a bastion in my life through multiple crises of varying magnitudes. Now, I had always had this feeling, although I didn't have a lot of transactions with Yaska over the last few years, we would speak on video at least once a month, sometimes even within a few days, if we had some ongoing business. I always had this feeling, if I came apart at the seams, if I broke down, if my whole way of living was suddenly turned upside down, I had Yaska behind me. I could go to Yaska and I could be sure that he would save me, I would say, from total disintegration. You know, the life preserver hanging on the side of the ship. And he's gone. Now what? Well, now he's gone. I think that's all I could say.
Thank you very much. Ken, I believe you're next. Would you like to say?
There's an order. First of all, I like to say that I'm giving a great big virtual hug to both Yoela and Charlie. You moved me like I cannot tell. And Charlie, I'm sure that you know that just like Yaska had this knack for picking up the pieces and putting a person back together again, he also had the knack to do the exact opposite, which is what I think Yoela mentioned when she spoke. And maybe, Nimrod, maybe I'll follow suit. I'll follow Yoela and Charlie and say what was my first encounter with Yoske? I mean, my meaningful encounter, because I knew him already as a child. He is my uncle, but I never really knew him. And at some stage in my life, I was about 22, right out of my military service. I joined a cult in Israel, and the Iman, if it is of any interest. And when I left the Iman a year later, I was a lost soul, if ever there was one. If there's any meaning to the words a lost soul, that was me. And I came to Yoske, and for several visits, he just said, "I'm here for you. What can I do for you?" And he did nothing for me until with my last breath, I said to him, "Yoske, help." And then he helped me. And later on, when I asked him, why didn't he help me before? He said, "Because you never asked." And I'm trying to make a point here. And the point is this: one, Yoske saved my life in more than one way. Two, he was a cold-hearted, cruel misanthrope, if ever there was one. Three, he was my last hope, not despite of being a cold-hearted, etc., but because of it, by it, through it. And with your permission, Nimrod, I'll tell exactly how it took place. He said to me, "The way I see it, you are addicted to wanting and wanting not the same thing. This is what is called ambivalence," but he didn't use that word then. I think he knew that I didn't know the word. "And if you want, I can tell you how to overcome this addiction." And I said, "Yes, please." He said, "Draw an imaginary map in your mind of all the things in your life that move you in any way. The things that you only want, highlight with green in your mind. These are not problematic. I have nothing to say about them. The things that you only want not, highlight also in green. There's no problem there. You flee from them, and there's no problem there. The things that you both want and want not, highlight in red. These areas you must stay clear of, come what may." And then he paused and he said, "The operative words in my prescription are," Nimrod, you know, right?
Come what may. What?
"Come what may." And I said to him, "Yoske, you don't understand. My whole life is in that red area, is in the last category." So he said, "So die." And what can I say? I got into panic like I never panicked in my life. So that bastard says to me, "Your panic tells me that you understood me." I mean, you cannot get much more cold-hearted than that, Charlie. I think you will concede. At any rate, he continued to say that there are two ways to die. You can die by actually killing yourself, commit suicide, or without that. Killing yourself is more final, but it is also more messy because you're leaving behind a broken-hearted mother. It took me a long time, I cannot tell you how long, because I don't remember, but a very long time to realize that his advice was the thread by which I saved my life. Nimrod, I can end the story here, can't I?
Sure. I would perhaps only add during the 4 or 5 years that I was Yoske's assistant, and I worked with him for quite a long time, every day from morning till evening, because I did all kinds of tasks in his archive. He was visited from 6 in the morning till midnight by dozens and dozens and dozens of students, and many of them did not know the others at all, and they were all convinced that they are Agassi's personal students, and they were, and each of them came from a completely different field. They were doing a PhD in anthropology or philosophy of physics or philosophy of biology, and he was giving full personal attention to each and every one of them. And it was amazing to see how each and every one of them was convinced that he's the or she is the one student currently in Agassi's life, and that was his secret. That was his real ability to move between fields so lightly, and to have each abstract conversation to resonate into the personal and into the most intimate, as Chen just described, and then to return to the abstract, and often translate it into a research, into a meaningful study, not just a meaningful personal experience. So it's an open mic. If anyone would like to say, Rafe, would you like to say anything, or Jeremy, or please do interrupt. Yes, Jeremy.
I have got a contribution to make, although I'm not quite sure in some ways whether it is proper, just in the sense that while I have got a great respect for Joska's knowledge, I really didn't get on with him and felt that I didn't gain anything much from him. Can I tell a couple of stories and then explain? I feel a little hesitant just because I feel, given the tenor of the earlier contributions, that it's a little like people joining people who are paying tributes at someone's graveside, but then kind of blowing a raspberry. But let me say, as a student in the LSE philosophy department, I knew of Joska, and I think I recall him as having given a paper to the Popper seminar on a Tuesday, or it was either that or he was due to give something but didn't. I say this because I have an association of him and the seminar agenda, but I don't recall what his talk will be on. I also recall references being made by Lakatos to his paper in Mind on sensationalism, and in the philosophy of social science seminars to some of his work in that field. I read and really appreciated his Towards an Historiography of Science, and growing up in the LSE philosophy department, I felt him very much as a member of that community, but one who was physically removed. I mean, there were others such. I mean, Ian was an example as well, and so on. I was, I think, probably first in personal contact with him when I was chair of a philosophy society that some of my fellow students had set up at the LSE, because they discovered that if they set up a student society, they could get money from the students' union that they could use for buying beer and wine at receptions. I suggested to them that as it was a philosophy society, we should have activities. Agassi was coming to the LSE and he agreed to give a talk. He left it up to me to suggest what he would speak about, and we agreed the topic, which was duly advertised, the philosophy of the social sciences. He, at the appointed time, came into a large LSE lecture theatre, if anyone knows the place, what was then called the New Theatre. But rather than coming behind and to a lectern and giving us a lecture, he simply sat on the bench at the front and asked, "Do any of you have any questions?" This, which I fear he picked up from Popper, and which seemed to me to be one of the very worst features of Popper's lecturing, is a disastrous way to proceed. I recall Leslie
I strongly disagree, but yes.
Well, okay, we could. I just think it is terrible. But I recall Leslie Sclair, who was at the time a lecturer in sociology at the LSE, who was in the audience, complaining strongly and sort of denouncing this, addressing his complaints to me, who was in the chair and not, I would stress, responsible. My second memory of Joske was at Altbach. I'd gone there when I was at Popper's assistant. I didn't get to attend anything as I was working on the revision, typing and retyping of the talk that Popper was due to give there. It was very much a working meeting for me. My recollection was that Popper had been invited to a small conference on creativity at the Schloss Kronberg by the German pharmaceutical company Boehringer Ingelheim. They, if I recall correctly, agreed that I could join him at that, and then paid for my rail travel to near Altbach, and then for a ticket onwards to Copenhagen, where I was going, and back to London. Prior to going there, I'm sorry if this sounds like a Shaggy's dog story, I purchased cheaply in Edinburgh a 2-volume edition of Jonathan Swift's works, and then happened to read, just before going there, a short piece in the course of which Swift had said that the difference between someone sane and a madman is that the madman says everything that comes into his head. This touched a nerve in the sense that I'd recently been reading some of Joske's work and had, as happened frequently when I was reading it, it just made me very fed up, because while he was obviously incredibly knowledgeable, his work seemed to me to be horribly disordered and in effect to be written almost after the fashion of a stream of consciousness. Accordingly, when I met with him on a one-to-one basis on the hillside in Altbach, I was prompted to say, "I think that you're mad," something which, if I'd had the chance, I would have explained by reference to what Swift said. In the event, Joske thought that this was a cryptic message that Popper had asked me to pass on to him, and wrote it up as such in his A Philosopher's Apprentice. More generally, I suspect that it might well simply be a matter of, in part, the settings in which we met, but also of our very different personalities and temperaments. But I was left feeling that I just didn't gain from interactions with Joske in the way in which I should have done. He seemed to me to know an incredible lot and to have interesting ideas, but to be reluctant to spell these out in terms of theories with which one could critically engage. For example, he's written a lot about science and metaphysics, but just what claims was he making about science and metaphysics, or about how metaphysics should be evaluated? There are lots of suggestive remarks in his PhD thesis, his scientific problems in the Bunger volume, and in his Faraday, and in many other places. But where does he advance a theory with which one can try to get to grips critically? In addition, it seemed to me that he had a tendency to act a bit like a would-be sage or oracle or guru. all of this, I'm sure, was my fault in terms of just how our personalities interacted, but it left me very frustrated and feeling really that if only I could have got him to spell out his ideas in a more systematic and coherent form, I could then have gone on to engage with them.
The quote I remember from Swift is from a letter to Pope, where Alexander Pope, where he says that he will never rest until every rational man will agree with him. And whether or not historically this is true or not, I believe this is what turned Swift mad toward the end of his days. And
well, we're talking about different things.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
We are. Sorry, this was a brief occasional piece of Swift's. In which
yes. No. I'm not correcting your. I'm adding my point of view, not correcting your quote of Swift. I'm adding a quote of Swift, which shows, I believe, that yes, Jeremy Schirmer and Joseph Agassi were worked in totally different conceptual schemes. I believe having a complete theoretical system was against Agassi's intentions and against his idea of what critical rationalism and critical rationalists should be. And this also goes to the way in which he tried to translate a critical rationalism into a philosophy of life. And in this sense, even the seemingly unconventional manner of entering a class and seeing what is the most burning problem around and trying to think together about it was his idea of how a critical rationalist should behave. He should not come with an agenda, because coming with or a theory or a lecture, because in this manner he ignores the crowd. It doesn't matter what crowd I have what I want to say, and I will say it whether you are there or not. You can give the lecture to an empty room. And if you're a critical rationalist, you are much more sensitive to what's around you. And then you try to speak to the problem situation which arises. And that usually comes when you say, well, what questions would you have? The most burning problem would usually erupt from the crowd. And not many people do it because not many people are able to respond so eloquently and so swiftly to any question which may come, whether we have free will or what is questions in molecular biology. But Agassi was such a person. He was able to respond quickly to a range of subjects. Usually you have to compile a whole set of experts in order to yes.
May I offer a correction?
Yes, please.
Often he would come with an agenda, but then he'd have a rule, and the rule was to say his agenda within the first 2 or 3 sentences at the most, and then open up the agenda
yes.
to whatever comes.
Yes.
And I think the important thing here is that he was what I call an agenda freak. He would always ask, what is the agenda? And if you asked a question, before even addressing the question, if something was unclear about your question, he would ask you about your question. For example, he would say, why do you want to know? Why are you interested? Why does it bug you? And here I wish to pay a compliment to Avraham Meidan, who is here with us. My first lesson, Avraham, I don't know if you're going to remember this. My first lesson in an Agassi seminar Agassi could not come because he was always somewhere in the world invited to conferences like you cannot imagine. So Abraham took his place, and we discussed the question of the demarcation between science and prejudice, or science and superstition, sorry. And Meidan said, why is this question at all interesting? Who cares? And people started philosophizing about it. And he said, okay, I'll tell you who cares. It is a matter of fund allocation. Because today science enjoys such a prestige that if you are considered, if what you do is considered scientific, you get funds. And if you're not considered scientific, you don't get funds. So the question becomes important. And I thought, how can you take such important philosophical issues and I don't know what's the word for it, bring them down, drag them in the mud. But Abraham, I owe you for this.
I mean, you owe Agassi because it was Agassi idea. I just want to add one thing about this point. This was really one of the main theses of Agassi, that you should start with a question, and the question should meet two restrictions. One, it should be interesting. You should spell why this question is interesting. And second, it should be under dispute. And the dispute should be between two theories, not the
At least,
like the dispute,
at least two theories.
yeah, at least two theories. So because many students ask questions like, and again, this is examples that I learned from Agassi, are cats good or not? So they are not good because they can hurt you, and they are good because they can kill snakes. This is not a dispute, because we both agree that hurt you by their nails is not good and killing snakes is good. So there is no dispute.
There's no
here.
contradiction.
No, it's not not just contradictions. It could be that the position cannot be true together. They can be false
Mutually
together,
exclusive.
but not, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And this is, by the way, what we did in the beg to differ. This was the idea. I told Agassi, it's time to write a book where you position these ideas clearly. And just to reply to Jeremy, it is true that some of Agassi's books you cannot know exactly, because he told me that this is one of his problems, that he write by association. But at least where the books that we wrote together, philosophy from a skeptical perspective, it's you have a theory, a well-constructed theory about his idea about skepticism. And in this book, he even goes further than Popper.
This is true of most of Agassi's collaborations. The most successful ones are with people who did not let his ADHD temperament go wild. He wrote two amazing books with Yuda Fried on philosophy of psychiatry, and of course we mentioned the collaboration with Jarvi also, and with Abraham.
And he asked me to do it. He
Yes.
told me,
Yes.
I mean, you have to control me. By the way, in these days, there is another book with Uri Weiss about game theory. So
Yes.
it has just published.
There's an interesting question in the meeting chat, which was directed at Jeremy, but I would like to answer, since I must have sat in a little more Agassi lectures than Jeremy. And the question was, what happened when the crowd did not ask an interesting question? So this happened often. And first of all, philosophically speaking, when the crowd is not curious enough and to ask questions that are interesting, then the lecture would fail. And many of Agassi's seminars failed. That's what he was successful at was when a person came to him and engaged in a question that was interest. But what I want you to think about, John, is that this failure is not such a bad result. Because if it is true that a room full of students is not able to produce a single interesting question, then they should go home until they have one. And this is often what he did. He lived in a world, an academic world, which we don't anymore, where he could say after 10 or 15 minutes, look, you don't have any interesting questions, you can go. And people would go sometimes. And I and a few other people would stay, and we would force a question out of us, and then suddenly the room would fill with intellectual flowers and meadows. And so again, as a philosophy of life, it became it made my life more meaningful. Another comment which I want to
Yes, it takes a bit of chutzpah to just simply let that
yes,
awkward silence just go.
He was teaching chutzpah, and in a way, if you didn't learn this lesson, you couldn't remain his student. You had to have chutzpah.
Chutzpah was the ultimate virtue in Agassi's view.
You're right on. And I do want to comment about the guru metaphor. So a guru is a traditional wise man, okay? So we have them in every tradition. And a critical rationalist guru is very special guru because he does not boast to know anything. And Agassi, whenever he gave advice, he said, I don't know if it's true. Usually he was right. That's another, but he never said, I am right because I am a representative of the wisdom of Patanjali or the wisdom of Confucius and so on. And so in this sense, he was certainly not a guru. He never boasted to know better. And he always suggested his advices as experiments. So yes, Charlie, please.
My one criticism of Yoska was that he was too quick to say the sentence, I guarantee.
I always took that sentence. I always took that sentence as a prediction, a scientific prediction. And I think that if you would ask him about it, that's the way he would describe it. So for example, let's give an example to people who may not be aware of it. Let's say I had a lecture, and it was one of my first lectures, and I was concerned about what I would be asked after the lecture. So he would sit with me before the lecture and conjecture all the questions, which in fact were asked at the end of the lecture. Okay, and he would say a sentence like that. He would say, well, I guarantee you that more or less this is the list of questions that you will be asked. And I took it as a conjecture. Of course, he was not able to, he did not have a foresight of a biblical guru, but he was usually willing to test it. And if he was wrong, he was, I often heard him say, listen, this was my bad. My bad was another sentence that was often heard.
Nimrod, another one that he would say in this context, maybe I think he would say it as an answer to Charlie. I am not looking for people who would say Agassi is right. I'm looking for people who would say Agassi is wrong, and I'm going to prove him wrong.
But for that to work, he has to say something.
Jeremy, you're fantastic.
I mean, this is, sorry, if I can come back briefly, I've had my electronic hand up to no avail. The lecture that he was giving was a public lecture, not a lecture to a class of students. He was simply insulting to the people who were there, and there was no particular reason why there should be in that particular setting a commonality of problems. He should have explained what problem he was going to address, and then to give us a theory which people could critically evaluate. The oracle stuff, it was basically that he made cryptic remarks. I mean, it was a bit like addressing the oracle at Delphi or something. So I'm sorry, but this is certainly how he behaved to me. And in general, it seems to me that his that his sort of stream of consciousness stuff effectively puts his ideas beyond criticism because he doesn't actually articulate and explain them. I think that the lesson that I've learned from this is really that I should go back to Agassi, but make sure that I read the stuff when he hadn't managed to break away from his keeper, and so that his stuff was under better discipline. So thanks for that valuable lesson. I mean, I just found myself utterly frustrated because he was incredibly knowledgeable, but he never actually seemed to me in when I had conversations with him or in a lot of his own writings on his own to actually sit down and explain what he took a particular problem to be, and then in a kind of systematic way to explain what he was wanting to say.
I would say that for that to work well, you would need to engage in a dialogue with him. It is true that it is less likely to happen in writing, and it happens very often in dialogue, because every particular reader is different and has his own objections and criticisms, and so you would have to engage in a close dialogue with him.
But that's why,
in order to get to the gist of the lesson.
Yes, but you see, that's why the sitting on the bench asking, have you got any questions to a large
audience, that's the human condition, Jeremy. That's the human condition. That's why we usually don't read a book from cover to cover, because no, you do, but that's why you are in a different conceptual scheme than Agassi.
Nimrod, there are people who want to speak, Margarita and Malaki.
Malachi, please.
Yes, I like to get some feedback on the article, Who Needs Aristotle? I read in the apprentice book that it took like 20 years to get published. And so I'm just curious, because there are multiple ways that the article can be read. And so I like to hear the genesis and the feedback, and whether people just said he's doing what Popper is doing, that's attacking Aristotle a little more, or whether there was actually something else going on.
If you read the paper, it's a very clear example of Agassi formulating a question at the first page and discussing every historical answer to it, and finally doing a very original contribution in the end. So it's a good refutation of Jeremy's impression, I would say. And what made it difficult to publish, I think, is its clarity. And the fact that he says that Aristotle is unclear about the question, because his metaphysics is a mishmash of everything that preceded him. And that's not something that is usually taken to be politely to be polite.
Yes,
that was his opinion of Aristotle.
Yeah. Now Malaki was here earlier
Yes.
raising his hand. I don't
Malaki.
see him anymore. I just
No, I see him. I see
Ah,
him
okay.
in front of me.
I have another question, but I'll let Malaki go first.
No, please, Margareta. Margareta, you were the first.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
I just want to say this. I got to know Agassi when we did the first meet and greet. And so I should say Rafe introduced me to Agassi. And so he very gracefully, because he was gracefully, he showed up a couple of times while we were practicing how to do Zoom and making sure we understand the time difference and so. But then I had 2 email interactions, and I think they're of fundamental importance, like it's my view. And one was, I asked him, do you know Stephen Pepper? And he has a book, World Hypothesis, and it is about the role of paradigmatic metaphors, but also root metaphors. And then he replied that I had touched his heart or something because I had brought up the topic of metaphysics. And so that made me actually very happy. But then I felt like I was afraid now, what shall I reply next? Because I never know. Now I'm going to get some other response. And then at some point, we started talking about the interactions at LSE. And that was Lakatos and Feyerabend. And so I was trying out a balloon of saying that maybe I should give us a background. My partner's father was analyzed by Karl Abraham. So he has a connection with the Freudian paradigm. And in Great Britain, there is something called the object relations paradigm that's very different from Freud. And out of that is coming what they call the trauma-informed literature. And here at Cornell, there is Katie Carruth and Shoshana Feldman. And I don't know how many people are familiar with that they look at the history through the angle of trauma and war. And they actually go back to the Iliad and the Odysseus. So I was trying out that argument and say, is it possible that Lakatos had experienced some trauma and that Feyerabend had his own trauma that he needed to claim? And then his answer was very quick and to the point that he thought Lakatos was evil.
Lots of informal conversations, get up, get ourselves more tea, coffee and cakes.
Yeah, and so there's the moment that he said that Lakatos was evil, I actually didn't respond because I didn't know, I just didn't know how to continue because that was a little too extreme because what do we mean by the word evil? So, and that gets back to Aristotle because I have found 3 world hypotheses of Karl Popper. If you look at all the footnotes, that is actually very similar to Aristotle's original triangle of reference. So not all the bastard versions of the early 20th century, but what Aristotle himself originally says. And that is if we use the word evil. So what are we trying to denote? Like, can we point our finger to something? And if we, at a minimum, maybe we pointed at a text where the word evil is written. But then we also need to think what's going on in the head of the person who uses that word. And so I
discussed this word with him quite a few times. So if
okay,
you want
well,
the short of it, I can give you. First of all, he didn't use that word many times, and he was aware that evil has religious connotations, and he took no part in those religious connotations. But what he meant was that Lakatos enjoyed hurting people and that he received pleasure from it. And he used that word maybe to 2 or perhaps 3 people throughout his life, according to him. So he did not use it lightly.
Yes, he said there are many people who do evil things in the world, but there are very, very few people who are evil.
But I have another point here. Agassi's colleagues, Ben-Ami Sharfstein, published a book where he argued that you can reduce or explain many of philosophers' idea by their psychology. And Agassi didn't like this idea. So perhaps this is why he answered your, when you mentioned psychoanalysis or things like this, he didn't like to explain philosophical ideas by psychological problems.
Malaki, you are too polite.
No, I'm not. Perhaps it's because the internet connection here is not very good. So I hope I'm coming across. There's no question. I mean, thought I would engage a bit with what Jeremy was saying. There's no question that Agassi's mode of writing and presentation was not a conventional academic one. But I think it is a gross exaggeration to say that there were no theses or ideas that were posited that one could engage. I can go over a number of them that I at least, got, whether they are in the field of epistemology, which is his version of modified conventionalism. I think there are a number of proposals there that I could engage. I engaged actually in writing with his proposal for the resolution of the question of Israel-Palestine. I actually was also quite enamored also of the one article that he wrote about the Talmud as the source for critical rationalist epistemology. I would mention that there is a good number of writers, academic writers, that we appreciate not for the conventional way in which they present and not because they're easy to read. Take, for example, Hannah Arendt. I think that the complaint that you articulated against Agassi could be easily articulated also against Arendt. But the question is, as you read Arendt all the way through, is there enough there by way of incredible insights and brilliance that you can take with you, or is there not? And I think that for both Arendt and for Agassi, this is the case. I would add something else, that it's not only a question, I think, of associative writing or of the lack of the lack of ability to abide by academic conventions. There's also, Agassi was educated in the yeshiva, which he mentioned only a few times, and in the rabbinic mode of discussions. You're not going to go to the Talmud and ask it to present clearly its thesis because you cannot otherwise engage. You engage with Agassi the way you engage with the Talmud, as a matter of dialogue and questioning. So try and think of Agassi as a yeshiva student in a discussion with the in a chavruta, and I think you will come out with the different results. All of which brings me to the overview. We all focus here on, since it's within the Popper community, on a very important dimension of Agassi's work, which relates to Popperian philosophy, but Agassi was also an Israeli public intellectual and advanced a good number of proposals for the future of Israel that I think had significant merit. Again, I disagree. I tried and modified them when I published in one of his festschrift, but I certainly think that they should be mentioned. And the third dimension is the one that I've just mentioned. Then where I do wish, that Joseph has done more. That is, that he kept his engagement with the rabbinic tradition on what she was brought up, and on the possibilities of dialogues with it all the way to the end. And that's something that I was hoping I would see in the final decades of Joseph's lives. But he did, I guess, want to leave something to do in the next world. So I suppose he's now engaged in a Talmudic debate with the angels.
Nimrod, let me direct your attention. Aaron Agassi is with us.
Aaron, would you like to say a word, Aaron?
I'm trying to get my I'm having a little problem with my
We hear you well, though. So if you don't succeed, you can still. Would you like us? Let's return. I mean, butt in when you think
and,
you.
And also Michael Segre.
Oh, Michael Segre. Michael, how are you? Michael,
I'm fine, thank you. I'm fine.
Would you like to say a few words about Yoski?
I've just come in. Can I just give me some time to get the atmosphere?
Well, can I fill the space?
We are informally engaging in remembering Agassi, each one in his own style, and yes?
I've just been asked to write a in memoriam for Yoske. You have read it.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your suggestions. For the moment, I have nothing more to say, but certainly something will come out.
You can put it in the meeting chat, a link if you want, and
okay.
People will read it.
Okay.
Nimrod.
Yes.
Nimrod.
Rafe, please. Go ahead, Rafe.
I want to start off with a little personal recollection of Joe and Judith, and then proceed to some more deeper stuff about Lakatos. The personal stuff is that I did get to stay with Yoski and Judith for several times for week-long visits. And one day I caught them laughing at me behind my back on account of my Australian accent, like, good eye. And the standard evening pastime there was watching B-grade movies. Now, getting towards some more serious stuff, it was at Yoski's place where I met none other than Charlie Sawyer. And I lobbed in there late one night, just as they were getting ready to leave on an aeroplane at 5 a.m. in the morning. And I sat in the lounge with Charlie for a while, and it turned out we both grew up on dairy farms, so we established a very quick rapport. And I think in the course of the evening, I mentioned I was going to Boston to catch up with one of my sons. As Charlie walked out the door with his suitcase, he turned over his shoulder and he said, "When you come to Boston, you better look us up." Well, I went to Boston. I stayed we thought I might stay for a week, but it probably ended up being 2 weeks because we had such a good time. But where I lived, they said, "By the way, when you go up to where you're going up to the University of near Washington," they said, "you might like to catch up with this lady who actually wrote a serious study of Lakatos, Lakatos's life in Budapest before he went to London." And so I contacted her. She drove an hour out of town to buy lunch for me, and she told me that Lakatos in Hungary was regarded by some as a basically evil, and others not so much. In other words, he had form. He had a serious reputation for destroying people's lives as a Stalinist apparatchik in Hungary before he fell out with the leadership and got put in prison. So, having had lunch with this lady, as she turned to drive away, she said, "You might like to contact Mark Naterno, who was in Washington." So she gave me his number. I phoned the number, and after we talked for an hour and a half, we decided we'd better get together. So I went into Washington and we met in the late afternoon, and we played some pool and drank some bourbon and talked some philosophy. And then we had dinner and we played some more pool and drank some more bourbon and talked some more philosophy until they decided it was too late to get on the train and go back where I came from, so I'd have to stay overnight. So next day was Thanksgiving. So, and they say you have to stay for Thanksgiving dinner. So at the dinner, we ate and drank quite a bit. And then they said, well, it's far too late to go back to George Mason University. You'll have to stay again. So, okay, I stayed another night. And the next day, they were setting off to spend the long weekend with none other than George Soros. They were going to be house guests with George Soros at his compound. And they put me on the train. I went back to George Mason University. So that now, as someone mentioned, Turno has got basically all of the files of Popper's correspondence. And one evening we got into a bit of correspondence between Popper and Lakatos. At the time when Lakatos was briefing Bill Bartley to go and give a really critical paper on Popper at Bedford College Conference. So Bill Bartley went off and gave a highly critical paper of Popper, which basically split their relationship for 12 years. And in the correspondence between Popper and Lakatos, it all started off very friendly, and Lakatos said, "Oh, wait, this is in writing, but how's Henny? I hope you got over a cold." And he said, apropos, I fear for my future at the London School of Economics because you are my sword and my shelter. Very, very friendly. But then Popper pressed on and he wanted to get the manuscript of the postscript back. Lakatos had a copy. He had the manuscript in his possession, and Popper wasn't happy with the way he was using it. And the tone of the conversation deteriorated rapidly in the course of the series of letters. And incidentally, I was in London when Jeremy told me that Lakatos returned the manuscript, but the last page was missing, and it turned up in Lakatos's photocopier. So basically kept a copy. Now, the point about this is that, first of all, from the lady who did the research in Budapest, Lakatos was a first-rate villain, a schemer, intriguer, with no scruples about any kind of damage he might inflict on other people. That's the first part of the story. The other is that he was deeply engaged in undermining Popper, with Bill Bartley as an unwitting accessory. Now, the other person who had harsh words to say about Lakatos, wasn't the only one, but in the Lakatos Festschrift, Bartley only wrote about a page and a half, but the guts of it was that first of all, that Lakatos was evil, but he's much more open and open about it than a lot of other colleagues who are probably equally bad, but they didn't front up so boldly and abruptly as Lakatos himself. So there you go. That's a Cook's tour from staying with Joe, meeting up with Charlie, getting passed on to another contact and another contact. And the great thing will be to get more of that correspondence out in public. There's so much gold in those filing cabinets, but it's all on microfilm, and it's the devil of a job to transcribe anything. Time-consuming, irritating, laborious. And I think I actually bought an upmarket scanner for Mark the last time I was there, but I think that even didn't help much. I think he gave it up. So there's still a huge amount of work to be done in that archive. So thanks for putting up with me. What do you got, Charlie?
Charlie? You're on
Unmute,
mute.
Charlie.
Charlie, you're on mute.
Hit your space bar.
Say the name of the lady that wrote the book about Lakatos.
Oh, it keeps falling out of my mind. I think I'm going into dementia.
Well, I'll say it then. Jancis Long.
Jancis Long, yeah.
Jancis Long, yes.
And was it published? And do you have a title in mind?
It was published as a longish article in the Philosophy of Social Sciences.
Okay.
And I can email a copy to people who want it.
I was wondering, it's not an Agassi related question, but is any of the critical rationalists in contact with Soros these days?
No, Mark broke off his relationship when he decided he didn't like some of the things that Soros was doing. But for some time he was a welcome house guest at Soros's Christmas parties and also his weddings and birthday parties. It could have been on account of Turno's very beautiful young wife. I think not Lakatos, but I think Soros liked to have beautiful young ladies around, so that probably helped.
It seems to me that the thing we need most is a journal, and for that we need funding. So that's why I'm...
Yeah.
Agassi said that he had once an occasion to converse with Soros, and he pitched him an initiative, and Soros rejected it, and then he pitched him another one, and he rejected it, and then a third one, and he rejected it, and that was it. If anyone here could have better success with Soros, I think we would all salute him or her.
I have a question about the relationship between Lakatos and Agassi a little more. There was that conference, the Bedford conference, that, okay, and so now I only know what is written in the apprentice book, but that Agassi wasn't there, I guess, and that actually that was the machinations of Lakatos, or how
Lakatos was networking all the time, according to Agassi, in order to, and plotting in journals, in corridors, in order for Agassi's career to wane. That
yeah.
was...
So that there was a very dysfunctional culture, and I'm just wondering when one of those historians of philosophy is going to actually really write about it, because I think it's actually a very significant period, because that there were great, I mean, that's the way that I'm reading it all. I think there were really very important ideas being developed, but then you have a couple of dysfunctional people, and they just really changed the course of history in some way by their disruptive behavior. And so that there is something to be learned from what happened there, that the entire discipline of philosophy actually needs to open its eyes to. And so so I think the apprentice book that Agassi wrote is actually extremely important, because it allows to see how a philosopher thinks also. And another thing I want to maybe throw out, so the way I was able to really understand Popper is he attacks the machine metaphor. He attacks the computational machine metaphor systematically. And if you look at the literature, it was like Thomas Hobbes who introduced the idea that mental activities are identical to those of a mechanical calculator. So there is actually a systematic way of thinking about Popper, but also about Agassi, I think. And so now we're living in a universe where everyone is thinking that the machines are going to be smarter than us, while in reality it's just some artifact. And it's like an automated librarian. But so to get back to the dynamics at LSE and and the relation between Feyerabend, Agassi, Lakatos, John Watkins. Maybe that is also for Malaki, because you stopped your book at some point, but you must have had a lot of information.
Well, I got Brian McGee's on the work, Brian Boyd's on the job.
Yeah, but until we have his job, if
Well,
Malaki,
Malachi's not going to write another book about Popper.
yeah, but we also need, we always need multiple perspectives. So if Malaki has something to comment or something in the pipeline.
That would be desirable. May I ask something?
Yeah, I think that as you mentioned, that the entire possible period appears only as an epilogue in my book, and my impression was identical to yours, and you articulated it very well. And that is that if someone were going to write a complete and full history of the Popper circle at the LSE, it's going to be one of the most fascinating stories in the history of philosophy. That we have bits and pieces, and we have parts, and we clearly have a lot of personal testimonies which can be worked with, and I suspect that we now have also some archives that can be accessed, although what we don't have, again, is with the departure of Ian, with the departure of Joseph, the people who were involved are no longer with us. But this does not mean that the task is impossible, and it would be fascinating. It is also true that part of the reason we do not have that production about that fascinating circle is because the discipline of philosophy has been moving in different direction. But that, again, that does not need to interest us, i.e. the fact that they are not interested in Popper and in the Popperian legacy. And I would greatly appreciate it. I was hoping initially that Jancis Long was going to do that when I saw what she was doing with Lakatos. But I'm really hopeful if you or someone does that, I would love to help you in whatever way, you can. It's a story that waits to be told, and it will be an extremely important story.
Yeah, Diana, did you have something that you wanted to say? Yes, I just wanted to ask if he did not like the computer model or machine model, like why did he not like it, and what else did he propose as model?
All right, since you bring up that question, that is where this book of Stephen Pepper is so extremely important, and that I was so happy that Agassi knew about it. That book kind of really focuses on the Vienna Circle. There were actually, if you get all the politics out of it and the name calling, they were focusing on how to work across the distinction between the observable and the unobservable. And so the majority of the participants, they kind of say, oh, we need to all stay on the side of the observable, and we pretend we can't talk about the unobservable. And so Popper kind of opened the door that we can talk about the unobservable. And then Agassi, put it wide open. But meanwhile, in the United States, you had the Macy meetings, and you had some meetings about artificial intelligence. And there they decided to anthropomorphize the machines, the cyberneticians. And then after, there was total confusion because there was a human language used to describe a computer talking from A to B. Then they started saying, and now humans are identical to machines. And so it is a metaphor, and the Stephen Pepper book makes very clear it's a metaphor, and it got introduced in the 17th century, and there are alternatives. And this Agassi and Popper and Pepper, they kind of introduced this other way of thinking, but for some reason, people love to think of themselves as machines, and that kind of we see now the consequences of it. And the main downside is a machine has zero emotions. If you use machine language, there's absolutely nothing to say about how to process emotions. I mean, it simple doesn't exist in a machine universe. So there, it's a different way of thinking. Someone said that earlier.
Neither does thinking, by the way.
Yeah, say that again. Sorry.
Not emotions, but not thinking as well.
Yeah. So it's a different conceptual scheme, and Popper somehow helps us, gives us a language, I think, with the three world hypothesis to think about how you switch from one scheme to another. And if I may make another plug for Agassi, like this thing of give me the agenda before we start talking, that's extremely important, because with an agenda, you put boundaries around the topic. And so you either talk about this topic or that topic, but you never mix all the topics together, because then, I mean, then it's just ultra confusing. And so we can think of humans as a machine, and that can be productive to some extent, but we need to be able to switch also to another way of thinking about humans. And that switching from one view to another, that is, again, something that machine theorists or computational machine theorists can't do, because a machine never switches. A machine has just a foundation, and it continues. And as a footnote, the switching of gestalts, that is Karl Bühler, who actually contribute to that thinking. And he introduced the concept of the aha-erlebnis, that is when you get exposed to a new gestalt. But we know the story of Karl Bühler. When the Nazis came into power, he had to leave Vienna, and then he came to the United States, but he never recovered his research agenda. He just kind of became, he just disappeared. He was not anymore a leading intellectual in the way that the other members of the Vienna Circle were. So there is something more to be explored there also. And now
You're on mute now, Margarita.
I was going to give the word to other people. I see Diana still her hand up, and I see Jeremy also. Diana?
Sorry, I just can't handle. I'm on my iPhone on my way, so I'm actually not raising it on purpose. I'm sorry.
So Jeremy, please.
Okay, thanks. I was going to address the issue that Malachi raised concerning a history of what happened in the LSE. The problem there in some ways is this. The archival sources on this are rather limited. There is the Popper archive, there's a Lakatos archive, there are Watkins letters, but there isn't anything else apart from the letters at the LSE. There are now also Bartley's papers at the Hoover. I hope to get to look at them in October. The trouble is that I don't know if Jarvi will have an archive, and I also think that in this context, Joska's material, if it could be ordered and made relatively easily available to scholars, would be might again be very helpful. But the real difficulty in terms of the LSE is that there was a significant change in what happened in about 1970, after Lakatos basically took over the department. And this was in ways that were, in some respects, rather odd, just in the sense that one might have thought that John Watkins would have played a leading role. But while he was a forceful and energetic person, he seemed actually to work best in a situation where he was playing sort of second string to another significant figure. And I think the role that had been played by Popper was kind of taken over in that respect by Lakatos. The other problem about all of this is the fact that people who were there in in the late 1960s and just into the 1970s are now getting old. And I don't think any of the people in question are distinguished enough ever to get an archive. It's striking, really, that the LSE wouldn't take additions to John Watkins' archive when they were offered by his widow. I mean, they're wanting to fill it now with things other than material relating to important intellectual matters at the LSE. And I think if someone did want to do this, they would probably need to whip round and do some oral history with some of the people who were there, while those in question can still remember their own names.
So much is lost, even when, if we had the perfect archives. I mean, the number of anecdotes and little stories that each one of us can contribute is, of course, much larger than any archive can.
Nimrod, may I just answer Margareta?
Yes.
Agassi didn't say, Agassi's ideas about machine was that a new formulation of the mind-body problem is whether or not machines are identical to person. But can we, whether or not machine or computers are identical to a machine. So this is his idea, and we wrote it in the book Beg to Differ as a new formulation of the mind-body problem, and he didn't have a fixed idea or that answer to this question. And I see that Sam in the chat said something similar.
What he said was that since matter can think,
I mean, obviously, brain can think,
yes.
But the question still is how or whether how comes matter can think like this. So this is a new formulation of the mind-body problem. This was Agassi's idea.
Anyone? I can, Chen?
I'm deliberating because there's no doubt in my mind that there's a lot to be said about Agassi that was not said yet. So
Really?
maybe I will suffice with one thing, with your permission. Somebody said here, and I completely agree, that no matter what field of knowledge, or no matter what thinker Agassi applied himself to, he always took the best of the best and then improved thereupon, or at least criticized thereupon, and that at least according to some accounts, this was the background for his falling out with Popper. So I want to suggest what I consider Agassi's main contribution to furthering or to advancing Popper's philosophy beyond what Popper himself had in mind. And I think it is this. Popper said that we must invite and open up to criticism, and we must tolerate the fact that other people think different from us. And Agassi said, this is true, we need to do that, but it is insufficient, it is not enough. We need to actually do it with love and with ease. We need to be happy when somebody criticizes us. We need to rejoice, not only to accept, but to rejoice the fact that other people.
Who was it that said, seek
Yeah,
criticism, not praise?
come again, please.
Who was it that said, seek criticism, not praise?
I don't know, but this is very becoming of your father, of course, and it is also Popperian. And maybe we should, I should close this thread of thought by giving credit where credit is due. Agassi himself gave credit to the Talmud. Somebody mentioned here to the Talmudian, I think Malachi mentioned it. Talmudic, thank you very much. The Talmudic tradition. And in that tradition, I think the epitome of that tradition was in the relationship between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish disputed almost over everything. And when Reish Lakish died, Rabbi Yochanan could not bring himself to enjoy the company of another scholar who agreed with him over everything. He actually needed as a means for, I don't know how to call it, for spiritual growth, for personal gratification, somebody to disagree with him. Thank you.
Now, Chen,
Yeah, Nimrod is the chair, I think.
No, okay, go ahead. I'm
Great.
trying to be as little a chair as I can.
something I've been working on is we talk about disagreement and that you should embrace disagreement. What
Yes.
about miscommunication and incomprehension? I feel that there are some people who fail to I think it's the same process that to bridge miscommunication requires the same process or similar process of ongoing error detection and course correction. And even some people who will criticize cannot tolerate incomprehension, which is as much a part of the human condition as disagreement.
Yes, but I would add that in order to comprehend each other, we need to share a problem situation.
This is
Well,
lovely.
even if they could be trying. Well, the problem situation. There are all kinds of problems that I might be dealing with, but the problem is bridging the communication gap.
I understand, for example, that my cat is hungry now because I can be hungry too. So we share a problem situation, and that's how I can empathize with her and
sometimes
understand.
the problem is actually just listening to the other person. Quite often we just fill in the blank and assume that we understood and listen to the other person when we don't really. We just fill in the blanks and tell ourselves that we actually listened and heard them. It's a general problem.
Absolutely.
What is the movie? I'm trying to remember. What's the name of the movie with the linguist working with aliens? Arrival? Is it?
Too much American mythology.
Aaron, you remind me of another movie. You please tell me which it is. I only remember the quote. We seem to have a failure of communication.
Failure to communicate. No, that's Cool Hand Luke. What we have here, failure to communicate.
Yeah.
Yes. Failure to communicate. Basically, that is a parody of cognitive behaviorism, where the purpose of communication is for you to obey me.
Exactly. Exactly. Your father, by the way, mentioned many times that people who are reluctant to express disagreement, instead of saying, I disagree with you, they say, I don't understand you. and sometimes we mistake disagreement for misunderstanding, and sometimes we do the exact opposite. We mistake misunderstanding for disagreement.
Some people feign incomprehension when they disapprove. This is intolerable.
That was exactly the point. Yes.
Jeremy?
Yes, I mean, just on this, it seems to me that one can usefully distinguish between addressing this problem in the setting of a dialogue, where typically the way to go might be that if someone says something, you have difficulty in understanding it, you typically then offer a reformulation and say, look, does this capture what was going on?
A reformulation requires some assumption of what the problem is.
Yes, of course, but
and if someone and if you're dealing with an interlocutor who refuses or who fails one way or another to provide any clue what's wrong.
Well, what you might,
I'll tell you, for example, it's common. There's a particular bad writing advice which is very popular, and that is to simple writing. So that someone, instead of engaging with the writing, is infuriating, that someone, instead of engaging with the writing, says, spouts rules about simple writing, instead of attempting miscommunication repair in order to really abet the rewriting. It's kind of a pseudo engagement.
But what I was wanting to suggest is that there is a dialogue which one can have, which seems to me probably best done one-on-one, and then issues about what people attempt to do with regard to writing or concerning a public audience. And there may be other strategies that can be tried out in those contexts, but I think they have to be very different from ones where you're trying to engage directly with the people and attempt these issues of reformulation, or of saying, look, I'm not quite sure what the problem is which you're trying to address, and then offer a conjecture as to that. But that,
yes.
But I think
are you saying that that's that one does that one-to-one, but you can't do that in a group discussion?
Yes, just on the grounds that it typically requires a cut and thrust between the individuals. You might be able to do things in a small group, but I don't think that you can do it effectively even in a larger group, just because it does require that
allocation of time and direction. But
well, particularly the direction in sense of the ownership of the chain of discussion.
Well, there's one advantage here for asynchronous text communication over any real-time communication, is that you don't have to allocate time, and that anything can be addressed between the different participants.
Okay, but the difficulty is going then to be that if you're engaged in that, if someone has difficulty in either understanding what someone is saying, or isn't quite sure what it's addressed at, or effectively wants to say, but look, you appear to be saying so-and-so, but this seems to me to have this kind of consequence, which I can't imagine you want to embrace. The problem is that if it's a multi-party thing, then unless the other parties stop and let these people get on with it, I don't see that you can get clarification.
I don't know. That seems like an empirical question. You'd have to try and see.
Mix of empirical and theory, but sure.
Oh. There's a conjecture that there might be such a problem, and empirically you'd find out how and when it actually arises.
So we have a few minutes left of this session. Does anyone have any closing remarks for
I would
remembering
like
Agassi?
to thank you and to thank Margarita and Ray for allowing this. And thank you.
I
Lovely.
second the motion.
Yes, but I also want to let you know that this room is open to continue the discussion. So there's something that's going to happen in the other room, but that's a completely different topic. So if you like to continue talking, you can. I mean, this room is open for the next 8 hours.
Whoa.
If there are still some topics to be explored.
Margarita, just in case I will not have the chance, I salute and thank you for the initiative. I think I speak for many.
Well,
one last thing, if I may, I'm about to drop into the chat the link to the slideshow of photographs of my photos of Joska. So
yes,
if you just click on it, it will come up and you'll see the slideshow.
Oh, if you're gonna plug your stuff, I'm gonna plug my webpage, foolquest.com, for anybody who's interested.
All right, so Charlie already shared the link, and so the link will be posted, but he shared that in an email. So I will need your email, Aaron, and then it will be easier to do this.
My email is AARONAGASSI @comcast.net.
Aaron, can you not write it in the chat?
If I can get to the chat, hold on, just a moment.
Okay,
Okay, I'm clicking on the chat.
No, I understood it. I can repeat it. It was simple and straightforward. But I want to just do a plug and say we're a team here. Dus it's dus first.
Okay, I'm attempting to type in the chat right now.
Yeah. Okay. So Elise in Brisbane right now, but next week in Los Angeles. And actually, I'm curious about what Alex said about Brisbane earlier, but there is also Rafe, and then there's of course also Luc Castellan. Luc Castellan is administrator of the Facebook page of Karl Popper on the website. So we're like literally a small institution that informally that emerged out of nothing, and if I so anyway, you can continue talking here, and if you if that's of interest yes, in several hours I will be talking a little bit about Sheldon Richmond, who wrote a book, published a book recently, for those of you who know him, Reclaiming Our Humanity, and it's all about asking questions. And I think he's kind of continuing the Agassi tradition, but he needs our help because we all need to ask questions. It's not just one person or a small group. We need to teach the art of ask. We need to bring back alive the art of asking good questions, like interesting questions, like Professor Agassi did in his seminars, I guess. So if you like to continue, please do. And if you like to go, the other talk is about Dennis Noble and gene-centric reasoning. So it's about biology. It's completely different, but you can do, as I said, the room is open until tonight when we close the session.
Oh, okay. I got my email and my webpage into the chat.
Very good.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay.
And actually, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm apologizing because I really have to go. So thank you. It was wonderful to see you all. Charlie, Abraham, and Joella,
Joella, I think I
Aaron.
missed your speech.
Yeah, I was maybe going to mention the way my first introduction to Agassi was in the 90s when I got the book of essays dedicated to him, and I think it was Rafi Sassover who discussed him as a teacher, and so that caught my attention.
Paper.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful paper.
This that he had to do speed reading, and if you couldn't do speed reading, but I also think, Aaron, that we exchanged some emails in the 90s, if I remember correctly, because, but you may not remember me.
What did we discuss?
Well, we just, it was something generic about maybe finding a way to do something, but then there was, of course, the financing that needed to be taken care of. And I was just a PhD student, so I was in no position. I had to finish my dissertation. I was in no position to start any adventures. And as a footnote, I used.
I pitched you a. You mean I pitched you a business proposal?
I'm not going. I'm reluctant to say it in those terms, but I vaguely remember that we did talk about something.
I see. Oh, okay. So I tried to develop a business idea.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
And it was in the context of philosophy and how to make it more available to the general public. And so we still can continue that idea like 30 years later. Maybe I'm now
I'm still struggling with that general. I'm still a wannabe.
Well, it's trial and error, trying out different things.
So if everyone's ready, we can move over to room 2 and we can go back into that main events room. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to stay here and continue the discussion as well.